All right, we are live. Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us again for our second night of 3 nights of our primer conversations about New Orleans schools and about the ways that our system is unique and different than other systems in the country as we prepare for our fall school board race. So as a reminder, we have on top of all the other elections that we're doing this fall, the presidential election, the district attorney's election, we're also going to be electing school board members. All 7 seats are up for grabs. And so it's really important that all of us in our community educate ourselves about the issues. And so that when you go to the ballot box on November 3rd, that you are able to make an informed decision. And that's the goal of these conversations that we're having this week with some subject matter experts, is to talk about some of the most important things that affects our system, and specifically the ways that our system is unique compared to a lot of other places in the country, and even in just in this state. And so if you missed it, last night was our first night. Last night we had Neva Butkus from the Louisiana Budget Project, and her and I had a really great conversation about school funding, about how it works in Louisiana, how it's a little bit different in Louisiana than in other states. We also talked about how specifically New Orleans has a little bit of a different funding situation compared to the rest of the state. Because as all of you out there know who are from New Orleans and live in New Orleans, you know that we like to do things a little bit more complicated than everybody else. It's one of the things that you can always count on in our city. And tonight we're going to have another one of those conversations about something that we do a little bit different than everybody else. If you missed last night's conversation with Neva, I would highly recommend you watch it. It's probably by far the best explanation of school funding at both the state and local level that I've ever heard in the almost 10 years that I've been in New Orleans and been in and around education. And so I would highly recommend you watch it. If you missed it, you can find it the same place you're finding this. You can find it on our Facebook page at Indivisible NOLA, or you can find it on our YouTube page, Indivisible NOLA. And then tonight, we have Aimee Grainer. I'm going to introduce her in a second. She's going to be talking to us about OneApp, our common enrollment system here in New Orleans. Before we get started, before I let Aimee introduce herself, I want to remind you guys, if you have a question, you can submit a question for Aimee by going to the website Slido, that's SLIDO.com, and typing in the event code OneApp as one word. Type in your question, and if you see a question up there that you like, that you would like to hear, you can like it like it's a social media page, and that'll pop it to the top for me, and I'll know which of the questions that people are asking that people are most interested in. I'm excited for this conversation. OneApp is unique in a lot of ways, just like the way that we do school funding is unique. And Aimee is a fantastic resource and expert of this. And so really excited to have her on here. She's a dear friend of mine and a colleague of mine. We've worked together at multiple places now. And so I'm really grateful to continue to get to work with her. And one last thing I want to do is I want to plug, we have one more of these conversations happening tomorrow. So tomorrow night at the same time, same place, 7:30 p.m. here on our YouTube page and our Facebook Live page, we'll be having Angel Delarge, who's going to be explaining how charter management oversight works and how that's different than most of the places in the state and in the country. And so we're hoping that all 3 of these conversations helps build sort of a knowledge base for folks as we go into election season. Because what you're going to start to see from our group, from Indivisible New Orleans and other groups, is you're going to see candidate forums for the school board races start to pop up for all 7 races. And it is a goal of ours that after watching these 3 conversations, it will help guide questions that you all may have for the candidates as you think about how you want to vote come November 3rd. And so with that, I want to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Aimee Grainer, who's joining us tonight to talk about OneApp. She's one of the architects of our enrollment system, and she was one of the top administrators in OneApp. And I think we'd be hard pressed to find somebody who has a greater knowledge about the system, about why we created it, and about how it works, about the things that work in it, the things that don't work, and also just general advice for families. And so I'm going to give Aimee a chance to introduce herself. Welcome, Aimee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kenny. I'm so excited to join you and delighted to talk to folks about the enrollment system. Much of my life, as I will share, or much of my professional life, I should say, as I will share shortly, has been dedicated to trying to make the centralized enrollment system, specifically in New Orleans, to make it navigable for families and to make partners and educators and folks who are invested in community to help them to better understand the system and why it exists. So I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you for having us. After a long workday, jumping on and doing some more work.
Oh, no, not at all. This is not work. Not at all.
So go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
Would you like me to tell you a little bit about myself?
Yes, we would love for you to tell you about yourself.
Great. So my name is Aimee Grainer, obviously. I worked for 8 years with the centralized enrollment system in New Orleans, otherwise known as the OneApp team. I worked with the enrollment team both at the Recovery School District before the unification of schools a few years ago in July of, when was that, Kenny? July 2018?
2017, I believe. No, 2018, you're right, 2018.
Okay. And up until that point, and then I transferred over and carried the work, as we said, across the river to the Orleans Parish School Board, now NOLA PS. I have also now worked with a couple of different centralized enrollment systems around the country in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm actually currently working on a project with Rhode Island. So I'm really passionate about centralized enrollment. For the New Orleans system, I specifically, I did essentially everything that was not the back end of the system. I'm still going to try to speak a little bit to that tonight. But by that, I mean that I worked with family supports and services. I did communications and communications. And I actually worked with the early childhood team as well, which is a little bit specialized. I also ran special events for enrollment, including specialized enrollment periods. So I really did the bulk of my work I would say, in the field or directly adjacent to the field, communicating with families, running the marketing campaigns, and I think really trying to make the enrollment system, again, navigable. I manage the entire team of folks who work at the Family Resource Centers, who actively enroll students who, walk up day to day. And we also help support the families who need help with the application process. So again, that was the past 8 years of my life up until, I say, 1 year ago. So full disclosure, I'm no longer working with NOLA PS or directly with the enrollment system. I can still talk a lot about the history and why it is the way that it is and the way that it works. But I do want to be clear that in the past year, I have not worked with the system. So any changes that have happened in the past year, and we've obviously had a pretty tumultuous one, I can't directly speak to that. But again, I will do the best that I can. I currently work, as Kenny alluded, with him at Agenda for Children. I work in a sort of child company of Agenda for Children called the New Orleans Early Education Network. I like to and it's called NOEEN. I like to refer to NOEEN as a micro school district because essentially what I do is I manage the publicly funded early childhood programs, child care, childhood programs for Orleans Parish. And that would include coordinating the way that those public dollars get funded to different programs. So who gets access to public money and how public money translates into scholarships or free high quality seats for families. I coordinate the accountability for how that funding gets funneled down to centers. I also coordinate the enrollment for those systems, or I assist coordinating the enrollment for the child care centers. And lastly, I coordinate the quality assessments for those programs. So I've sort of jumped into one of the more narrow focuses that I had while I was working with the enrollment team, which is early childhood enrollment and education. And that brings, I think, me up to the present. So I'll pass it back to you, Kenny.
Thank you for that, and we are very happy to have you, and I'm very, very thankful to work for you. Aimee is such a great resource. So Aimee, I want to start off super simple. So let's ask if anyone who's watching this or who will watch this is brand new to the city and is like, all right, where I come from or wherever I came from, you live in an area, you live in a neighborhood, and you go to the school that's in your neighborhood, which is how enrollment functions in most of the country, where you just go to the school that is closest to your house that you're zoned by for some district lines that were drawn through a political process. That's not what happens here in New Orleans. And so let's start with the simplest question of what's different about the enrollment system here that it doesn't function that way.
Sure. So we have what's called a centralized or unified enrollment system. So exactly what you described of sort of you move into a neighborhood and you go to your neighborhood school, you're zoned for a specific school, and typically you wouldn't have the option to go to a different school unless you moved into a different zone. You can see that changing up a little bit around the country as different types of options become available. And I don't just mean private school. I'm talking about the typical public school family who may not have a paid option. But that's becoming different in lots of different cities because of the influence or increase of charter schools around the city, or sorry, around the nation. As you all might know, or as you may not, one of the things that makes New Orleans really unique in the regards of enrollment and otherwise is that it's a fully charter school district. So you have lots of different choices. And the way enrollment interacts with that is that you don't necessarily get assigned to a single school based on where you live. You have the choice of any of the public schools in the city, and you get to rank them in the order of your preference and be assigned to one of those schools. So it changes things in a couple of fundamental ways. One is that you have the choice to go to school outside of your district. So that's already one really fundamental shakeup. And another fundamental shakeup, which I think is one of the potential pain points, or it's perceived as a pain point, it causes a lot of confusion, is that you don't have a fallback school. So unlike another district, even that had choice, there's not the school you're assigned to, and then you have other options aside from that. You don't have a pre-assigned or an administratively assigned school when you walk into the city.
Gotcha. And so with that, thank you for explaining how that's like different. And so basically, if I were, say, a parent and I moved to New Orleans right now, I would have to fill out what most people call a OneApp application. And as you just explained, you would rank your choices and then you're matched based off an algorithm. Like, how does that work? How does the match work?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, there's an algorithm or a lottery system to determine who gets to go to school where. So the way that the OneApp works in brief, and I'm sure that I will be forgetting something because I am just speaking off the cuff, but the way that it works in brief is that a family who is new to the city or who would like to transfer schools for the upcoming school year, maybe they moved, maybe they don't like their school, maybe a new school opened and they're really excited about it, maybe their sister loves their child's school, the nephew school, and so they want to apply to go there. Any number of reasons. You fill out a OneApp, you list your schools in order of preference, and then all of the applications across the city and across the nation, because folks can apply before they move to New Orleans if they intend to move to New Orleans. They all get into a lottery. The way that it works at how we determine who gets to go to which school is that each school has what's called a priority structure. I want to be clear, it's not a district-wide priority structure, and it's not a student-based priority structure per se. Each school gets to tell the district, they tell the enrollment team, here's the order in which I would like to consider the applicants to my school. First, I want to consider the folks who are siblings of my current students. So if Johnny has a baby brother, Jimmy, and Jimmy wants to go to my school, then Jimmy is going to get the first priority if he applies to go to this school. Secondly, I want to consider all families who live in the district, even if they don't have a family member who goes to the school. So that would be all the families who live in the geographic area of the school. And that is, I named those two intentionally because for most schools, the vast majority, I won't name a percentage, for most schools, those are the top two priority factors, is they want to keep it in the family. They want to keep kids, relationships with families and keep kids together, siblings together. And then the second factor is they really do want to build a community and have folks coming in from around the neighborhood. So those are the first typical two priorities. And then the remaining priorities can be based on a number of things. It can be based on what that school has got going on, the particular type of programs that school has. It can be based on I'm trying to think of another priority factor. It could be based on things like diversity. So they could prioritize children who have IEPs, which is an individualized education plan for special education. So there are a number of different priorities that can be baked in. The school tells us what those priorities are. And then in the back end of the algorithm, it's a little complicated. How deep in the weeds do you want me to go, Kenny?
We got some really weedy questions yesterday, so as deep as you want to go.
Okay, good. That's great. So the way that the lottery works is it's a weighted lottery. So it's not like there's like a big old ball with like the raffle numbers and you're sort of just every kid gets a lottery number and you're pulling them out of the hat, because there are these priority factors. And that's what I call weights. The weights also stack is the way I refer to them. So they can combine to be a greater weight. So for example, a student who applies who is both the sibling of somebody who attends the school and they live in the zone and they have another priority to the school, that kiddo is going to come above somebody who just lives in the neighborhood because they have additional priority factors that influence the weight.
The stacks. Can I ask a point of clarification here, which I'm sure some folks are wondering, is you said previously that the priorities for each school is decided by the school. So that's not decided by the district, it's decided by each school. So let's say, just for argument's sake, that I'm hypothetical school A, and I can say, okay, in Ronolo, what I want my preferences to be is I want the number one preference to be kids in my neighborhood that like live geographically near the school, and the number two preference is kids that have siblings already in the school, because I want to make sure that those families that live in the neighborhood come together. And then my third preference is I want to have a deliberately diverse school, and so I want to have like these types of kids come to the school. And then you could, as a separate school, make a different determination to say, well, at my school, at Aimee's Little Tykes, I want to have a sibling priority first and foremost. I want to have a priority for kids with IEPs second. I don't care about like geographic preference at all, but I have a really great STEM program. So like for everyone who's like applying and saying that they want a STEM program, that's who I want to be priority. So basically we have over 40 different charter management organizations in the city, and all of them get to decide individually what their preferences in terms of the lottery are, and that is weighted based on their ranking. And so it's sort of like a double match where families rank the schools they want to go to, and the schools basically rank the weights that they want to get into their school. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair comparison. I do have a couple of points of clarification. One is that a school just can't decide willy-nilly what they like. They can't be like, I prioritize kids with red hair or whatever. Like,
yeah. There's like a drop-down list, basically.
There's a reasonableness standard. And I will say that while it is very possible that a school could say, you know what, it's not as important to me to keep it in the family. The most important thing to me is to have a community and, community school. We're going to do geographic priority up to the highest degree possible. And that's another thing I want to talk a little bit about. But they could say that. They will quickly find almost immediately that it's untenable. It's not a position that they can maintain, because as soon as they get those kids matched, and there's a whole bunch of siblings who weren't able to go to school with their brothers and sisters and their cousins based on the way we define sibling, it's just a non-starter. So while
because the families would leave if they can't get the other kid.
The parents will break the doors down. It's just not a possible position to maintain. And there's a lot of reason why those are the top two priorities, is because they're for the most part, they're the priorities for both educators, and more importantly, they're the priorities for families. Like when push comes to shove, parents want to keep their kids in school together for the most part. There are some exceptions, of course. And so I do want to clarify that piece. I also want to clarify, because something you said reminded me of an important point here, and it's, I think, one that's not well understood, which is that we don't have a lottery that prioritizes children who rank a school first above children who rank a school third, for example. I want to go into that a little bit because it might be controversial. You might say, that's really not fair. Like, if
I ranked it higher, why didn't I get it?
Yeah, if Sarah ranked the school third, then why in the world would we put Sarah in before Samantha, who ranked it first? That's not fair. And the reason why is because of these priorities. And that's not necessarily an example that happens in every instance, every time. The way that families rank choices matters a lot. And that's another thing we may have time to go into. It matters enormously, but it doesn't supersede the priorities. So Samantha has a twin sister who goes to the school, and she also lives within walking distance of the school. And Sarah just likes it, but she lives across town and she doesn't have a family member there. Then Sarah doesn't get preference over Samantha in that scenario. So that's something that I want to clarify, because it's something that is easily confused.
Okay. I want to ask a couple of things. This gives 1,000 questions. And as a reminder for folks that are watching this, if you have a question for Aimee, you can go to Slido, that's SLIDO.com. Type in the event code OneApp and type in your question and it'll pop up for me. We have a couple, but I'm going to start with mine. So I want to ask a bit of an obvious question that I'm sure that folks feel is just to clarify, schools are not allowed to create a preference that's we don't want a type of family. So a school could not say, it's my preference that I don't have anybody from the neighborhood because I don't want that. There's no sort of exclusionary preference you can have. There's only preference you can have to prioritize kids based upon a profile you're building as a school.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You cannot, and I'm so glad that you asked that, Kenny, because that's another thing that was a question I would often get from families, is that they were worried that somehow something about their child had been considered. Well, let me say it a different way, that they really thought that there was a greater degree of sort of human sifting to the applications.
Yeah,
it's true. So they talked about the application process as if there was a person looking at, I'm running out of big names. Timmy, they're looking at Timmy's academic and disciplinary record and being like, I don't want Timmy. That's never going to happen. None of those factors are considered. The disciplinary record is not seen. The academic record is not seen. And
IEPs are not seen.
Yeah, the IEP is not seen. The race is not seen. We do not collect race on the application. There is no factor for which a school could discriminate against, I can't remember the preposition I needed, but there's no factor that a school can use to discriminate for a child, because the schools don't see the applications. And that's another reason why the algorithm exists in the way that it does, is that there's no, person in the background sort of deciding which kid gets to go where based on some kind of bias or preference. That's not something that exists. And I want to clarify too, for anybody who's feeling like, I don't know if I quite believe that. One, that the algorithm is just a really long math formula. So I assure you, it's not, there is no sort of discernible
invisible hand.
Yeah, there's no invisible hand. Thank you for that, Kenny. But furthermore, it's against the law. Schools can't access academic records or information about a child from another school before that child is assigned to them. So it's just not something that is happening.
And I want to back up here for a second and sort of zoom out, because we did get very in the weeds there. And thank you for that, because it's growing my own knowledge of it, even though I worked in the system and worked with you at the district. I guess to back up here for folks is, in a system where we literally do have enough slots for every child, why do we even have a lottery? Let's back up to that sort of value question of, if there is, not even hypothetically, if there's literally a spot for every single child aged 4 years old to 17 in the city, why is it that there's even a lottery? Why isn't there enough space at every school? Why can't I just say, I want to go to insert school here, and I just go there and I don't have to do this whole OneApp lottery thing?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kenny. So this gets to the root at why I am passionate about centralized enrollment. Which that statement in and of itself might be unpalatable to some people, because it's not an easy, I think, topic to tackle or talk through, because there are, of course, as with anything, trade-offs to a centralized enrollment system versus a traditional school system. The reason why this system was founded in the way that it was and why I believe in it, is that you can have great disparities in quality and in access based on a zoned district. So say, for example, that Oscar moves into the zone of an F school, and it's the only area of the city that they can afford to live in. And so, that's Oscar's situation. Maybe his family has few means. Maybe they don't have transportation. Maybe that's where their family lives and they have to move in with their family. It's not, I think, it's pretty obvious to say it's not fair to Oscar, the child in this scenario, that the quality of education that he has access to is dictated by the zone that he happens to live in and that his family happens to be able to afford. The way that works, the way that education's system, or our education system, has been designed to be based on where you live, it has meant that education has been sort of coupled with the segregation that exists in our society. So we have segregated neighborhoods, and they're segregated not just by race, but by class and by opportunity. And I think that is something that we could obviously spend a lot of time talking about, and it goes even beyond education. But by and large, we have neighborhoods in this country and in this city that, because they are poor resource and because the families in that community tend to be of a lower socioeconomic status, they just don't have access to as high quality of an education. And if you believe, like I do, that education is the key to our society, and deeply important to civil engagement and deeply important to breaking inequities and to repairing some of the wrongdoing that we have done in our segregation and in our bias and our systemic evils, I think that for me, that sells centralized enrollment, because what that demands is that Oscar is going to be able to apply to what I'm looking down, because Oscar is the name of my cat who happens to be sitting here. Oscar, gets to apply to all of the A schools anywhere in the city, because Oscar deserves to have access to the schools that he wants to go to. He also gets to apply to, C and D and B schools based on his own preference. So that leads to a second point here, which is another argument for centralized enrollment, and one that I didn't make, one that's less sort of ideological. It's just that, there's a value in choice. There's a value in having the choice to say, I don't like the school that's down the block. I don't like the principal. I don't like the teachers. I don't like the curriculum. I really like this other school, that's in Mid-City, and I live in the Marigny. And so I want to apply to go to that school in Mid-City, and they have a bus, and I would rather send Oscar there. So those are the two, I think, primary arguments for why centralized enrollment is that it creates, or it has the opportunity to create equity and break up segregation and break up the sort of systemic barriers that exist in our school system. And it also just introduces choice and opportunity for families who may not otherwise have them.
Thank you for explaining that. And I think I'm going to lead you into another answer I've heard you give before, because I think it's a really good one you give. So in everything you just said, the goal of centralized enrollment is to break up, like you said, segregation that just stacked inequity upon inequity over time. Because I think most people who think about schools can understand the basic premise that in most places in this country, where you were born, the zip code you're born in, particularly given that school funding is tied to property taxes in most places. So if you live in a wealthier area, you have a better resource school. If you live in a poorer area, you have a poorer resource school. And then obvious outcomes abound from there. And so I think what you did a great job of explaining there is that the basic idea of a centralized enrollment system where parents can choose, not based off of just geography where they go, is that a family isn't confined to their education choices based simply because they happen to grow up in a poor neighborhood, or they happen to grow up in a middle-class neighborhood, or they happen to grow up in a wealthy neighborhood. The family gets to decide among the factors that they choose what is important to them and how they choose a school. So if they choose simply based on the letter grade, they can do that. If they choose because the school has a great English language learner program, they can do that. If they choose because it has a great STEM program, they can do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I would love for you to talk about what OneApp doesn't do. Because let's stop burying the lead here and talk about the fact that I would say when you talk about the public-facing parts of our school system, OneApp is probably one of the more maligned parts of our system. Because the reality of it is that we have a system where people end up not getting their number one choice, right? Like if everyone got their number one choice all the time, everyone would love OneApp. That doesn't happen. And so let's talk about like what OneApp can't do.
Yeah, that is that is a great question and a great point, Kenny. So what OneApp can't do, OneApp can't create additional seats in the prettiest penny on the block. So for example, Warren Easton, which is one of the most popular public high schools in the city, and it regularly gets more than double the number of applications than there are seats at Warren Easton. OneApp cannot then create seats for all the kids who want to be able to go to that school, and it cannot fix schools that are struggling. So this is I think one of the challenges with a centralized enrollment system. And I almost want to say it's one of the limitations in its ability to combat equity. And I don't say that because I think, or combat inequity. I don't say that because I think that it's not doing enough. I just think that OneApp is a centralized enrollment system is one piece in a really large puzzle of solving educational inequity. So for example, and to use the Oscar example, so Oscar now has the opportunity to go to the school in Mid-City that is higher quality and that his family prefers, rather than the school in the Marigny that they didn't like and that maybe is lower quality. OneApp can't improve the quality overnight or automatically of the schools that families don't want to go to or that aren't serving students well. OneApp cannot do that. It cannot fix the quality. It cannot create additional seats at higher quality schools. However, I say that with a big caveat. Again, I don't think that's necessarily a fundamental limitation or kind of like a record skipping part of OneApp. I think that's in some ways a way that is a very powerful tool, because what it has done, and in fact, even what you said of like, there's a lot of people unhappy that they can't get into the number one choice. That pressure and that visibility has given families more leverage and more power than I think they can well understand. As families demand to be able to go to the schools that they want to go to, or to go to schools of a certain caliber, it puts enormous pressure on educators and on district leadership, on really everybody who's working behind the scenes in education. It gives them a lot of pressure to meet that demand, to improve the schools, to increase the options that match what families are looking for, to expand in the neighborhoods where families say there aren't enough schools, to fix policies that aren't serving families well, increases a lot of, the sort of pressure that district leadership would have to be able to make these changes quickly and to respond to family demand. So that's one thing it does. I think another thing it does is it just has the power of comparison. Like when you have choice, like it changes the way you evaluate your choices. Rather than saying, I'm going to move into this neighborhood and that's the school we get to go to because that's the neighborhood we live in. So like, that's where Rachel is going, like that's in that scenario, you may not have an incentive and you may not have an inclination to say, but how does that school measure up to other schools? And maybe maybe you looked and that was the neighborhood you could afford and so on and so forth. But maybe you didn't. Maybe that's like where you moved because again, like your sister lived down the road. And so you're not necessarily given that incentive or even the tools to be able to say, how does it compare to schools across the city? And what I have seen OneApp do, and what I have seen just sort of all the tools around OneApp, all the choice tools do, is it has increased the opportunity of families to say, wait, that's my neighborhood school. That's not good enough because I'm looking at my neighborhood school and it's a D. And there's this other school on the West Bank and that school's an A. And why do I have to go to this D school, because I live in the Irish Channel, and then somebody who is a 10-minute drive away gets to go to this A school? What gives? It gives people power of comparison. And I think that gives them leverage in the market to, again, be able to demand better, both of their neighborhood school and of all the other people who have the higher level decisions about our entire community and city of schools.
I think 2 points I would say, just like add to that, not really in a full set, is like, one, in the example of Rachel you gave of the parent, I think that um, something that there's probably people who have a difference of opinion of you, and I think that's why I asked you about the values behind why centralized enrollment is. It is a common practice, specifically with those with means, to choose where they live based on the school district. Like, I mean, that's what happens basically everywhere else in the country. Even in my own life, my parents made decisions about where to rent and where to live based upon the school district, because they had a kid and they knew that the most important thing they could do for that kid was to get them into a good school, and that was like their number one decider. And I would say that for a lot of parents around the country, one of the top, if not the top decider of like where you choose to live is like where you'll get to send your kid to school. And I think that there's probably a not insignificant number of people in the city who are people who have higher means who feel like, well, I bought a house near this school. Why can't I send my kids to that school? And this system sort of flies in the face of that, right? The system says, well, it's one of the, four preferences on there. Good luck if you can get in there. The second thing I want to say, like very bluntly, because I think you said it in a very eloquent way, but I'm going to say it in a much more blunt way, is I think a common misconception about OneApp is that, like you said, OneApp cannot change the choices that people have. It is the simplest way I can think about it is that the common enrollment system, whether you agree that there should be one or not, which is a whole nother philosophical debate, it cannot make different choices exist. It can only try to equitably divvy up the choices that are available. And so if there are, 10,000 available seats, it can only figure out a fair way to give out those 10,000 available seats. It can't make there be 11,000. It can't make there be 12,000. It also can't make the seats be located in a different place. And so I think that a lot of the vitriol that we see happen publicly about OneApp, I think it comes from a place where it's a little bit misplaced, where it's like the reality of it is that OneApp can't create more choices that families want. And so if families only want to go to a handful of schools in the city, the question to ask is not how did OneApp fail our community? The question is, how do we get parents more access to more choices that they want, right? Because like you said, I think the perfect example that you gave is Warren Easton. Like Warren Easton, we all know, is one of the most popular schools in the city, and every year has double, triple times the demand that they have the number of spaces to fill. And I think the question that we all need to ask, and the reason why we're having this conversation, is to think about how to hold people running for public office and positions of power in the school district accountable. Is how do we get more schools like Warren Easton? If everybody wants to go there, how do we make sure that there are more Warren Eastons? What are the things that we are doing and are not doing that will make there be more schools that are that sought after? If a school is having double, triple times the demand that it has space for, it also says a lot of obvious things about the other choices that people have. And so I think that's a really, really important point that I'm glad that you brought up, that I led you into it, because I think it's like I said, I think there's a lot of displaced frustration with our enrollment system. I think that there's fair criticisms that people have about things that are confusing, things that are not clear. And I think that's often said is school choice only works if you feel like you actually have choices, like you actually have choices that you like, or that you want, or that you feel is desirable for your family. And I think that's a fair criticism of our school system as a whole. I think that part of the reason I wanted to drill down to the specifics of how it works was to really clarify for folks that there isn't, like I said, some invisible hand saying, Aimee gets to go to Warren Easton, but Kenny doesn't because I like Aimee and I don't like Kenny. It's not, that's not how it works. And unfortunately, in other places, that does happen. In other places, if you are a person of wealth or power, or in some places elected office, there's a very notable story in our nation's capital of a powerful public official basically circumventing their enrollment system and getting their kid into the highly sought after school in the system. And the thing I like to remind folks is that, If she sent her kid to public school, the mayor would have to fill out a OneApp, just like everybody else. If the governor lived in New Orleans and sent their kid to public school, he'd have to fill out a OneApp like everybody else. And I think I think that there's a sense of fairness to that. I think there's a lot of things that like you could debate about, like what could be fixed or adjusted, etc. But I think there's a sense of fairness. It's like it's not just like wealth and power like you see in other places. And so I would agree with you that like on its face, I very much think that like us having a common enrollment system is a good thing. I think that like there's obviously lots of things that people have about fair criticism about the way the delivery system, etc. And that's what I want to drive into next with as we start to like get closer to at the end of our time. Is so you spent 8 years working on OneApp and building it, and like you said, your number one focus was trying to make it as accessible as possible for families, make sure that families understood their options and understood how the system worked and how they could use it to their advantage, etc. What do you think needs to be fixed? What isn't working about the way that we do enrollment? What could be improved? What are the tweaks that you would make if you were queen for a day?
Wow, that is a really, really good question, Kenny. And it's one that I have definitely pondered for a really long time. And I'm having that moment like in a bookstore. I walk in, and like, but I have so many books I wanted to buy. Now I can't.
Or let me actually, I'm going to actually challenge you a little bit more. I'm going to ask you this question in a different way. Same question, but since we're doing this because of the upcoming elections, if you were running for school board, given everything you know about the school system, about OneApp, what would be something I've been talking about? I talked about last night, and I'm talking about it tonight. And I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. Is given our decentralized nature of our system, I really want members of the public to think about our school board members as one of their main jobs to be advocates. It's their job to listen to their constituents, listen to the people that elected them, and be like, people think these things are not working for people. How can we fix that? And like to present ideas and to push the administration and to push our charter management organizations to like make those changes. And so if you are Aimee Grainer running for public office and running for school board this fall, when you think about OneApp and you think about the things that you would tweak, what would be the things you'd be advocating for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So well, I'm going to give you one boring answer at least, which is just that I would make improvements to the existing application. And I know that sounds like kind of a cop out, but let me explain what I mean by that. Right now, the way that it's designed, it doesn't help families navigate this incredibly important and incredibly difficult choice that they have to make about their child's school. So there's just not, I feel like, enough support embedded into the system and enough auxiliary support. Like if you're not walking to a family resource center, you might not interact with a person. You might not go on a tour. You might not talk to other people in the school district or in the community about why they chose their school and how it works. You may not do the research or have the resources to do the type of research you want to do.
All the time.
I'm sorry.
Or the time.
Or the time. Yeah, time is a resource too. That's exactly right. Like you may not have what you need to be able to do it in the way that you want to do it. And if you just show up cold to submit your OneApp, there's not a lot in there to help you figure out what it is that you're doing and the gravity of it. Of, like how walking families through, if you choose to go to a school on the West Bank and you live on the East Bank, talking through that, like what that might mean for your child. And I think it could be something that's in the application, or it could be something that's like a follow-up, something that's a little bit more human and high touch. And the reason why I think that matters is not because I don't think families can think through those things on their own. Of course I do, but because I have direct experience with it from my own experience with school. You don't always consider what that means, like the cost of going to school further from home, even though it's higher quality. You don't consider, like, it means you may not be able to participate in any extracurriculars. It means that if you miss the bus, then it's another 2 hours before you get home. It means that you're waking up before it gets light out outside. It means that, and I'm not saying this is necessarily true for New Orleans, but these are some things that I personally experienced, because I applied to go to a magnet school for high school. And my neighborhood school wasn't very high quality. and my family didn't have means. And there's so much about the high school experience or about any school experience that you just got to think through, like, what is your family situation, and what does your child want to get out of school, and what are their strengths, and what are the things that they need to work on, and is applying to the school across town going to help them meet those goals and help you support them and be involved in school in the way that you want to be. So I think pouring into that, into the support for families, both human support and technical support, to just make the application really responsive and humane and help families make this really difficult decision. So that's kind of boring. I think another answer that's a hot take is that I think that families should have a default school. I have wrestled with this. I think I'm open to disagreement. I think there are probably people I've worked with in the past who are turning over in their enrollment graves. Like, they're against it. But I'm increasingly convinced that it's better for families if they have a default school.
Can you explain a little bit more? What would that look like? What would that mean for a family to have a default school?
Yeah. So, for example, like, say, Kenny lives in the neighborhood of school C, and he's not super thrilled about it, and so he wants to apply to school D across town. And if he doesn't get in, he gets to go to school C. And there's a lot to, again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so to clarify what that means, the way OneApp currently works is Kenny's applying for schools. Kenny's parents are applying him for schools. Kenny's parents list school A, school B, school C. And if Kenny doesn't get his top 3 choices, he gets one of the lower choices. And it just goes all the way down the list. Because I know that on OneApp, you fill out, 10 choices, I think, total is what you can fill out, something like that?
It's 8.
8. So you can fill up to 8 choices. So you get one of those 8 choices. It just goes further and further down the list. If there's not a spot at 1, da-da-da-da-da-da. But what you're saying is that you would prefer a change in the system where you default to essentially your neighborhood school, where you're like, Kenny wants to go to school A, but there's only so many slots there. Mm-hmm. If Kenny doesn't get in, Kenny goes to his neighborhood school. And so, like, Kenny doesn't ending up at school C, which may have been his 7th choice that's in the east, and he lives on the West Bank, and now he's stuck there because that's all he had. It went all the way down to choice number 7. He just ends up at the neighborhood school. Right. And so in the system you're describing, would you just basically have 2 choices? Choice would be the school you want, and then the default school if you don't get it?
No, I think that what we could still do, and again, this is something we're going to get in the weeds again. And there is I say this that is really truly a hot take, because even though it sounds simple, there's so many ramifications to figure out about how should it work? Should that alter how many choices families should be able to apply for? Does that mean that schools are reserving a certain number of seats for their default kiddos? And how do they account for that? How many seats, particularly if it's a high demand school? There's a lot to figure out there. But I think what I'm ideally describing is that Kenny still gets 8 choices on his application, but if he doesn't get in, he has a home. He has a school that he gets to go to. And kids, today, they do. You are guaranteed to be able to go to a public school in the city. That's your right as a taxpayer and as a citizen of New Orleans. However, you don't have a default school. So what we sometimes see is that families might assume, okay, I'm going to apply these schools that I want to go to, but then if I don't get to go, then I'll go to whatever school. They might have a school that they think that, no problem, I'll go there. And that's not always possible. And I've seen the kind of pain and confusion and somersaults that it puts families through because there wasn't that fallback option. There's alternatives to it, but that's something that I think is worth talking about. I think it's worth talking about how do we protect families and make sure that the choices that they have, if they're not able to get into a really, really high demand school, that they are left with a educational option that really works for them and their family, and that doesn't overtax the school district either by busing kids across town unnecessarily.
Point of clarification here. So is, for someone who might be new to the city, who's watching this, or just not know that much about OneApp, can you end up with not having a school? Let's say you put 5 preferences and none of them have spots. What happens then?
Yeah, so that's very much possible. And yeah, again, glad that you brought that up, Kenny. It really depends on the grade. It depends on the grade And
So let's not make it complicated and not make it like pre-K or anything like that. Let's say you're a third grader, so like you definitely have to go to school.
Mhm.
You put 5 choices, none of those 5 choices have space. What happens?
Yeah, if you apply to 5 schools and none of them have space for your child, then you're asked to participate in whatever the next round of enrollment is.
Okay, and then you just keep making choices until you get one that has a spot based on what's left.
That's right, based on that still has seats.
And so hypothetically, just playing this out, in our current system, you could say, I want to go to these 3 schools. This is what I like. And you do one at round 1 in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
None of those 3 schools have a spot for you. So you say, sorry, Miss Grainer, there's no space for your kid at these 3. You got to do one out round 2. So you fill out, you pick a different 3 schools because those previous 3 schools don't have any spaces. You don't get that. So you also don't get one out round 2. And so then that's why we have late enrollment. We have late enrollment because it's like if you didn't get your choices, now you're like basically last dish. You got to go. You must choose from one of these choices that is left. Which one do you want? That's how that works. And like I said at the top, there's literally a space for every child. So it's not like you can end up without a school.
Yeah, you're not going to end up without a school. But yeah, I think it's a great example because the average number of choices remains around 3. So that's very common is that families, like, they have a few schools that they are excited about. And so they're not necessarily listing the other schools that they would think about going to if they didn't get into one of those 3 schools. And the trouble is that if you're applying to 3 schools, I will bet my bottom dollar that at least one of them, if not all of them, is going to be one of the highest demand schools in the city, because your top 3 choices are very likely to be most other families' top 3 choices, because other families are picking, for the most part, on the same factors, quality and reputation and word of mouth. And so there's a lot of cases where it's like we'll get kindergarten applications, like the whole cohort, thousands of kindergarten applications, and the top 3 choices, it's like
for everybody.
You can just roll. And so, like, when that's happening, then there's going to be a lot of cases where kids are not getting into those top 3 choices. And yeah, you're like, at that point, you're told, sorry, you didn't get anything in this lottery, and so you have to try again. And at that point, there's going to be even fewer options available to you. So I do think that it is really challenging for families. And there's other ways to mitigate that. I won't go into that if we don't have time, but I'll say this is one quick plug: list more choices.
Well, yeah, that's my last question for you is going to be, what can families do? But I felt like you had at least one more tweak you would make if you were advocating as a potential school board member. So I want to get back to that.
Oh, I'm sure I do, Kenny, but I don't recall.
That's okay. I did sidetrack you. And so I want to get to the last question because we are running down to the end of our time. And thank you so much for your time. If you're giving everything you know about this, OneApp is actually coming up soon, y'all. Families gonna have to fill it out in about a month, right? Usually October, November they have to do it. So if you're a person with children watching this and you have to already think about your choices for next year, what advice would you give the families as they go through this process?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked, Kenny. I think I don't even know where to begin. I would say do your research, go on tours, access every means that you can to learn more about the schools that are available to you in the city. Like looking at the online catalog and the school finder and the website and talking to your neighbors, it's not enough. You have to really get a feel for a school. And I know that's not easy for every family, but we really do have choice in this city. We genuinely do. And the schools are different, and so many of them are doing so many cool things with kids. If you get in the building, you can see it and you can get an understanding for it. And so do your research about the options that are available to you. Make a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. If you don't get into those top choices, where would you like to go? And if you don't get into those second tier choices, then where would you like to go? Because the reality is that there's no guarantee that you're going to get into one of the choices that you list on your OneApp. And if you list your choices in full order of preference up to the one that you're like, yeah, I guess I would go if I had to, like, all it does is it gives the OneApp team an opportunity to be like, I know exactly what Miss Thomas wants, on her application. So first I'm going to try to get her into these top choices. And if I can't, I'm going to get her into these second tier choices. And if I can't, then, God forbid, I'm going to get into those last choices. It gives us an ability to be able to figure out how to best support your family, more or less. And I know it is an algorithm, like I said, but that is what you're doing for the system, is making it really clear exactly what you want and putting those choices up front. And all it does is increase your chances of getting a choice that you want. It doesn't decrease your chances of getting into a top choice, which is a common myth. And we didn't get a chance to go into it, but it's commonly misunderstood.
Oh, please do, because I that is one I've definitely heard from when I was a teacher. Families would say that.
No, not at all. Not at all. So again, it's a computer, so it's blind to it. The way that the algorithm works, and I said this at the very top, and we didn't really get a chance to go into it, rank really, really, really matters for family applications, despite what I talked about, the priority structure. Because what it basically does is the algorithm will take the application and it will attempt to get everybody into the highest possible ranked choice based on the priorities. So it's going to first be like, can I get you into your first choice? Okay. And this is in consideration with all of the applications in the system. So it's a complicated kind of
It's a lottery.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, can I get you into that top choice? Oh, I can't. Okay, I'm going to try to get you into that second choice. I can't do that. Can I get you into that third choice? Bingo. And then it doesn't even look at the other choices. So it's not like, oh, well, she listed 12, or I'm sorry, 12 isn't enough. She listed 8 choices. So I'll put her in the 8th choice because, Miss Donald, she only listed 3 choices. So let's get her into one of those 3 choices. That is not how it works.
So it just goes down the list based off of your preferences and the priorities and space.
That's exactly.
And so one of the things you'd recommend the families is to make sure you fill out all 8 slots the first time and really consider the 8 schools you would want to go to.
Yes, but, and this is a very, very strong but, if you are already enrolled in a school, if you're using the OneApp to transfer schools, only list schools you want more than the school you're going to.
Because you do default to, so you do have a default school if you're already in a school.
If you're already enrolled. Yeah, if you're already enrolled, there's no need to fill out a OneApp year to year. You're automatically guaranteed to continue in that school as long as you want to. The OneApp exists as both a transfer and a new admit,
Gotcha. So your previous idea about a default school is for new people.
Yes, I apologize. It's for new people. If you're new to the city, if you show up in July, then you don't have an automatic school placement. And that's a good example. Why a lot of the seats are gone, and it's really challenging. So
that's another thing I was thinking about. Is that unless basically you have to move to New Orleans right before OneApp opens, or you're gonna have less choices.
Yeah, or you fill out your OneApp because you're going to move
far. Yeah,
but that also requires.
I didn't know you could do this. Thank you for telling me. I don't know you can do that.
Yeah, you won't get the same. You won't get priorities. You won't live in
the there. You won't live near the school. Yeah.
But you absolutely can apply from a different.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, the odds that someone moving from out of state knowing to do that's I think that's a tough thing for someone to assume about a place they move when literally everywhere else in the country you just go where you live.
Yeah, and it assumes a lot about that family's circumstances. Families who don't have as many means, they tend not to be able. They don't have the 10-year plan or the 5-year plan. They might not have a week plan, and so expecting to survive. Exactly, to apply from afar, it's a high order.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for your time and for explaining all this to me and to everyone that is watching this and that will watch this. I know I learned some things about OneApp that I didn't know. And that's part of why I love doing, hosting these conversations on behalf of Indivisible, because I come away from every one of these conversations learning something new. And so thank you so much for your time. I want to tell folks we have one more of these types of conversations tomorrow. We will have Angel Delarge from the Louisiana Association of Public Charter Schools. So similar to what Aimee just did, where she sort of said, here's how our system in New Orleans works, and here's how that's different from other places in the country, and here's her opinion as to why that's different. Angel's going to do the same thing tomorrow. She is going to talk about what is different about the way that our system is governed compared to other cities and other places in the country, what specifically is different, how it's different, why it's different in her opinion, and she'll take your questions just like Aimee has today. You can, if you tuned in late or you were watching this later, or you just see like a clip of it and you want to watch the whole thing, you can find it either on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page. Both of them are Indivisible New Orleans. I want to thank our guest, Aimee Grainer, for joining us and for letting me elongate her workday tonight. And also hi to Oscar in the background. I don't know if you can see this, Aimee, but he's been in the background for the last 15 minutes. And a typical cat. I'm sure he like ignored you all day, and now he's like all on top of you because you're not paying attention.
That's exactly.
Well, I don't have pets. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you guys for joining. I will see all of you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Kenny, and good night, everybody.